everyone, I'm Adam Haritan. I'm hanging outside today during one of my favorite times of year to be outside, and that is the spring ephemeral wildflower season. And I especially like hanging out on days like today, days that are sunny and warm. Now, what's interesting about spring ephemeral wildflowers is that they're only available for such a short amount of time. And so if you don't get out and see them right now, you might not have the opportunity to see them until next year. And that's because spring ephemeral wildflowers take advantage of a unique window of opportunity in between the late winter snowmelt and the mid to late spring canopy closure, whenever the deciduous canopy fills in with leaves. But right now, if you take a look around me, you can see that the deciduous canopy hasn't filled in yet. The only leaves that you're really seeing on the trees or shrubs are on the conifer trees or maybe some of the invasive shrubs like multiflora rose and privets. But as far as the cherries, the basswoods, the sycamores, the oak trees, the maples, the hickories, they haven't fully leafed out yet. And because of that, a lot of light can penetrate through them, hit the forest floor, and the spring ephemeral wildflowers really like that. So they can send up their flowering stalks and complete their reproductive cycle in this relatively short amount of time. Once the deciduous canopy fills in, however, that will shade out a lot of the spring ephemeral wildflowers. They will die back. It might not be around until next year. And so what we're going to do is take a look around, and I'm going to introduce you to some spring ephemeral wildflowers that maybe you're not familiar with, or maybe you are familiar with some of these. But either way, I know you're going to learn at least something by watching this video, and I can almost guarantee that you're going to have a good time. So without any further introduction, let's go take a walk and see which spring ephemeral wildflowers we can find. Okay, so I found one of the coolest wildflowers here in North America. It's one I look forward to seeing every spring because it's only really available in the spring months. This is a true spring ephemeral wildflower because every part of this plant dies back once the leaf canopy fills in. So this one is Dutchmans Breeches, Dicentra cucullaria. This belongs to the poppy family, or Papaveraceae. Here in North America, there's about 7 species in the Dicentra genus. Here in the eastern half of North America, there's about 3 different species. So also squirrel corn is a Dicentra species, and wild bleeding heart, also known as fringed bleeding heart. So let's look at that Latin name for a second. So Dicentra means two, di is two, and then centron means spurred. And it refers to these 2 outer petals here, which are spurred. They kind of terminate in points in their U shape. And then if we look at the species name, which is cucullaria, that means hooded. It's Latin for hooded. And that refers to the 2 inner petals of this plant, which form a covering or a hood over the reproductive structures, which would be the stamen and the pistil. So we see that there are 4 petals to this plant, 2 outer spurs, and 2 coverings inside, which form 4 total petals. Now, when somebody looks at this plant, they might be wondering, why are these spurs there? What is the purpose of these 2 spurs which terminate in points? Well, that's a good question. And basically, it's well suited for pollinators this time of year. So if you look at the shape of these spurs, it's perfect for an insect with a long proboscis or a tongue to get in there. And specifically this time of year, that would be the bumblebee. So no surprise, the bumblebee is the main pollinator of Dicentra cucullaria in the spring months. Now, as a member of the poppy family, Dutchmans Breeches contains a very unique phytochemistry. It contains many pharmacologically active compounds, including aporphine and protopine. And then there's another well-studied compound found in this plant. It's an alkaloid known as bicuculine. Now, bicuculine has been shown to antagonize GABA receptors. Now, GABA is the chief inhibitory neurotransmitter found within the mammalian central nervous system. So by antagonizing GABA receptors, what bicuculine can do is basically stimulate epileptic and convulsant activity. So when this plant is at least fed to cattle, it seems to poison cattle, and the concentration is highest in the storage organs. So the underground storage organs is where you find a lot of bicuculine, also aporphine and protopine. And even though this plant may have a somewhat toxic phytochemistry, this plant had been used medicinally by cultures who inhabited areas where this plant would grow. And this plant had been used to treat syphilis and also chronic skin lesions. So Dutchmans Breeches, Dicentra cucullaria, one of the coolest wildflowers in this part of the world. I encourage you to get out and look for it. Let's go see what else we can find because I know there are plenty of other wildflowers out there. Can you see this flower down here? This one is so overlooked by most people who walk through the woods. However, if you know what plant this is, you will definitely look for this flower this time of year. So this plant is wild ginger, Acerum canadense, and it belongs to the birthwort family, which is Aristolochiaceae. And so this is a family of plants that is characterized by having unique flowers. I mean, this is one of the most unique flowers I've ever seen in my entire life. Also very unique phytochemistry, and we'll get to that in a second. So Acerum is a genus of about 120 species worldwide. Most of them are actually in Eastern Asia. There's about 6 species of Acerum in North America. We've got one lucky one here in the northeastern United States, which is Acerum canadense wild ginger. Now, whenever I find this plant in the wild when I'm leading walks in the woods, and I tell people, hey, we found wild ginger, this is wild ginger, everyone. Everyone gets all excited until I tell them that it's not really related to true ginger. So this plant isn't really related to true ginger. However, it does kind of smell like ginger and taste like ginger if you scratch and sniff the rhizomes. So if you scrape away some of the soil here, and you look at these rhizomes under here, and you scratch it and you smell it, it'll smell like ginger, and it'll taste like ginger as well. And you can use it as a mild substitute for ginger. Now let's look at this plant for a second. When we look at these leaves, we see that they're unfolding right now, and they're heart-shaped leaves. Now these leaves are botanically known as euphylls because these are true leaves that photosynthesize. But if you look at the base of this stem right here, this hairy stem, you will see that there are rudimentary scale leaves, and these are botanically known as caterpillars because they're not true leaves like these ones right here, so they're not really involved in photosynthesis. You can oftentimes see them at the base of this stem. Now, as I mentioned before, species in this family, Aristolochiaceae, contain a very unique phytochemistry. So this plant has been used to treat coughs, colds, indigestion, and it's also been used as a spice or a seasoning because it tastes like ginger. Now, there's a lot of warnings associated with this plant and other members of this family because it contains a compound known as aristolochic acid. And aristolochic acid has been shown to lead to chronic kidney disease, urinary tract cancers, and also liver cancers. However, research shows that species of Acerum, and this is Acerum canadense, are generally considered to be less toxic than other members of the birthwort family. And a very recent study in 2017 looked at various members of the birthwort family. They studied the concentrations of this toxic compound, aristolochic acid. What they found was that wild ginger was actually very low on the toxicity scale. Other members, specifically in a genus Aristolochia, contain higher levels of that compound. So I'll let you be the final judge on what this plant may or may not be able to do for you. Wild ginger, really exciting plant. I hope you're just as excited to find it as I am. But let's continue our search because I know there's a lot more wildflowers to be found. I gotta be careful where I walk around here because there's so many beautiful wildflowers. I don't want to crush any of them. This one's one of my favorites. This is Bloodroot, Sanguinaria canadensis. This is a monotypic species, meaning it's the only species in the genus Sanguinaria. This belongs to the poppy family, Papaveraceae. And like many members of the poppy family, it exudes a colored or milky sap. So that's where that name Bloodroot comes from, because the roots are red and they exude a reddish sap whenever you cut into it, and many parts of this plant exude that color whenever you break into it. For example, you just take your fingernail and you can break into one of the veins very carefully in the leaf, and you'll see this reddish sap come out of it. Now, Bloodroot isn't really a true spring ephemeral, kind of like some of the others that we might be talking about, just because even though the flowers are ephemeral, the leaves actually persist, and the leaves will continue to grow throughout the summer months. A lot of the other plants that we're talking about today, they almost disappear completely, or completely in many cases just go underground for the rest of the year. But these leaves will persist and continue to grow. Now, when we look at this plant, we see that there are numerous yellow stamens, these are the male reproductive structures in the flower, and one single solitary pistil, the female reproductive structure. Also, what's very unique about this plant is that it's got one leaf which encloses the flowering stalk. And that leaf essentially protects this flowering stalk from the wind and also helps to conserve warmth. And what's interesting about Bloodroot is that although cross-pollination is the primary method of reproduction in this plant, if this plant is not cross-pollinated by bees or flies, there's a backup plan, and that backup plan is self-fertilization. Now, Bloodroot has an interesting history with human beings. This is a fantastic dye plant, so many beautiful dyes can be produced from Bloodroot, including reddish dyes, pinkish dyes, and also orangish dyes. Currently, this plant is being used as an alternative to synthetic antibiotics that's added to cattle feed. There's an alkaloid compound in here known as sanguinarine, which is being used as a component of cancer treatment medications. Now, keep in mind that the medicinal use of Bloodroot is rather controversial today due to potential toxicity associated with this plant. So if you're deciding to do anything with this plant, I encourage you to do more research on it first and make an educated decision. So this is Bloodroot Sanguinaria canadensis, the only member of the Sanguinaria genus. I'd love to stay and chat more with this plant and about this plant, but I think there are plenty of other wildflowers that we can find. So let's go see which other ones are out there. So it really wouldn't be spring without this plant right here. This is the aptly named Spring Beauty. Very beautiful wildflower and an edible wildflower as well, and pretty much the entire plant can be eaten. So we've got two species of Spring Beauty here in the eastern half of North America. This is Claytonia virginica. We also have Claytonia caroliniana. The main difference is in the leaf structure. So these leaves are more slender and grass-like compared to Claytonia caroliniana, which are broader and typically have leaf petioles. Now, as I take a look around at all these Spring Beauties, I can see that there are many different colors of flowers. Purplish pink, pinkish flowers, and even whitish flowers. So why is that the case within this general area right here? Well, floral color variation is attributed to at least 3 different compounds. Cyanidin, which is a crimson pigment molecule, acting with 2 flavanol compounds, so quercetin and camphorol. And as those 2 latter compounds increase in concentration in this plant, the color actually fades to white. And not only do those compounds aid in coloration in this plant, but they also play a significant role in defense against herbivores and also against fungal pathogens. So perhaps these whiter flowers are actually better off out here in the woods compared to the pinkish or the purplish Spring Beauties. So here's another patch of Spring Beauties not too far away from that first patch. And I decided to come over here to show you them in full sunlight, because these flowers seem to really blossom and really fully open up when it's nice and warm and nice and sunny out. If you visit these flowers early in the day or on a very overcast day, they might not be fully open. Now, speaking of the flowers, there's a really interesting botanical term used to describe the flowers of Spring Beauty. That botanical term is protandrous. Have you ever heard of protandrous before? Well, protandrous means that the male reproductive floral structures mature before the female reproductive parts mature. And this ensures that the pollen of one flower does not pollinate the stigma or the female reproductive structure of the same flower, essentially assuring that self-pollination of one flower does not occur. Now, speaking of pollination, that's what the nectar guides are for. So if you look closely at most of these flowers, you will see these pink vertical stripes that go all the way down to the base of each petal. These are nectar guides that guide the insects to the source of the nectar. Now, not only do insects really enjoy these plants, a lot of humans enjoy the taste of this plant as well. And as I mentioned before, this is an edible plant, so you can eat it. Whenever it's very plentiful, I do like to consume some of the flowers just as a trailside nibble. They're very mild. The leaves are edible as well. And the underground storage organ, which is botanically known as a corm, that's edible as well. It's nice and starchy and full of way more calories than any of these aerial portions. But just keep in mind the population levels, and if it is very plentiful, maybe you could snack on a few flowers as you're walking through the woods. So this is Spring Beauty Claytonia virginica, one of my favorite spring wildflowers. It'll definitely be gone within a few weeks, and now's the time to go see it. I know there's a couple more wildflowers to be found, so let's go see if we can find any more. I really enjoy seeing this plant because it's one of the first wildflowers to appear in the eastern half of North America. So this has many names: Hepatica, Windflower. Latin name is Anemone acutaloba. Anemone is Greek for windflower, and then acutaloba means sharp lobe. So when you look at the leaves of this plant, you'll see that they terminate in sharp points. Compare that or contrast that to Anemone americana, which is another anemone species or Hepatica species which grows around here. That's the round lobe Hepatica. Right around here, I generally see more of the sharp lobe Hepatica. And so this plant is not really a true spring ephemeral wildflower because the leaves actually are evergreen, at least for a year. They persist a whole entire year. If you look closely, you'll see that there are last year's leaves down here. They're kind of spotted with these red maroonish hues. And you can see the new leaves developing as well. But first the flowers come up, then the new leaves appear. You'll see all these structures at once. Last year's leaves, this year's leaves, and also the flowers. So it's kind of like Bloodroot, where Bloodroot's not necessarily a true spring ephemeral wildflower. Even though the flowers disappear, the leaves persist. Their leaves will persist all the way up to about August, then they'll kind of die back. When you look at Anemone, they'll persist all year. And this gives the plant a jump start early in the spring season because it's able to draw upon some of those stored carbohydrates that it's been making all year round. And that's why this is one of the first wildflowers to appear. Whenever you look at the flowering stalk, you see that it's kind of hairy. This helps to conserve warmth during the early spring days when it can be kind of chilly. It gives this plant a jump start, allows it to flower essentially earlier than many other plants. Also, these hairs might deter insects, specifically ants, from climbing up the stalk and stealing nectar from the flowers. Speaking of insects, Hepatica doesn't require visitation by insects in order to ensure successful pollination because this plant is able to successfully self-pollinate. Now, they call this plant Hepatica because of the way the leaves look. They kind of look like liver. You see the lobes of liver in here, and also that red or purplish mottling kind of looks like a liver. So traditionally, this plant had been used to treat liver conditions. And in 1883 alone, over 400,000 pounds of this plant had been harvested in the United States to be used in medicinal formulations. So I don't know too many people using this plant today medicinally, though I'm sure some people are. Perhaps some people have used it successfully. I just like to find it, take photographs of it, and film some brief segments on it, and that's what I'm going to do today. So this is Hepatica anemone acuta loba. Get out there, see if you can find it, or its relative, round-lobed Hepatica anemone americana. Beautiful wildflower. I'm sure there's one more that we can find before we wrap up for the day. So let's go see if we can find that other one. Okay, so we're gonna end on this fantastic wildflower right here. I really enjoy seeing this one. This one's the yellow trout lily, Erythronium americanum. And I had to pass this one up early in the video shoot. I didn't know if I'd be able to film it today because it was a little cloudy, it was a little cooler early in the video shoot, and so these things were closed. They were just hanging, drooped over, and I thought, I can't really show that on film. I gotta show them in all their full blooming glory. So now, because it's a little sunnier, it's a little warmer, now they're fully opening. So this one's related to tulips. It's in the lily family, Liliaceae. And like the other members of the lily family, this is a monocot. So when you look at the leaves, you will see that there's parallel venation. And when you look at the flower parts, you will see that they're borne in multiples of 3. Now what's really interesting about this flower is that botanically they contain tepals. T-E-P-A-L-S, tepals. So these aren't really referred to as petals or sepals because they look so identical to one another, it's hard to tell the difference between the petals or the sepals. So botanists just call them tepals. And the outer tepals almost look like somebody took a paintbrush with red and brushed it. That's how you can tell the outer tepals. And the inner tepals, when you look at the bases of them, you will see that they're auriculate, ever so slightly, meaning that they're ear-shaped near their bases. Now, like other spring ephemeral wildflowers, trout lily can take a long time to reach reproductive maturity. It can take 4 to 7 years in order for this thing to flower. And only the plants that have 2 leaves are the ones that will produce flowers. When I take a look around here, I see a lot of trout lilies. It's a very, very common plant. However, I'm only really seeing the single-leaved plants. I'm not seeing a ton of flowers, so I don't see a lot of mature plants, but I see a lot of the leaves. But I really look forward to seeing yellow trout lily every single year. It's a true spring ephemeral, so you're only going to see it in the spring months, and it's going to go underground for the rest of the year. So now's the time to go see it. All right, so there we have it. We talked about a lot of different wildflowers that are around right before this deciduous canopy fills in with leaves. So now's the perfect time to find all those that I talked about and more. And I'm wondering, have you seen these wildflowers before, the ones that I talked about? If not, which ones are you seeing? And if you're not seeing any wildflowers and you live in the eastern half of North America, get out right now and start looking for them, because in many cases, you're not going to see them again until next year. Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, I truly appreciate it. If you want to stay in touch, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Head on over to learnyourland.com, sign up for the email newsletter. We can also stay in touch via social media at Learn Your Land. Thanks so much for watching this video. I wish you the best of luck in your wildflower excursions.